The Nintendo 64 was officially released in 1996, forcing it to compete with both the Sony PlayStation and the Sega Saturn, though the Saturn was by far the least successful of all three. If you were born around 1990s, it was very likely you grew up with a Nintendo 64, PlayStation, or even both consoles. Which is why, in effort to relieve the glory days of gaming, I'm counting down 5 Nintendo 64 games. So without further ado, let's get into it. Number 5, Goldeneye 007. Based on the 1995 James Bond movie Goldeneye, GoldenEye 007 is best known as the forefather of first-person shooters, complete with a free-roaming solo campaign as well as a multiplayer deathmatch game mode. GoldenEye has everything that modern FPSs simply don't. In the year 2000, GoldenEye developer Rare went on to create a spiritual successor for the game titled Perfect Dark. Needless to say, the alien shooter did not disappoint, and now both GE and PD are hailed as classics. Number 4, The Legend of Zelda, Majora's Mask. So what if Ocarina of Time's direct sequel was a little dark? What with the creepy moon face and all? So what if the game's theme was centered predominantly on death and despair? One of the most beautiful things about Zelda's franchise is its ability to take on an entirely new tone with each passing game, and Majora's Mask took on a uniquely somber tone, completely unlike any other Zelda game before it. Still, for a Nintendo game, Majora's Mask contains some pretty heavy stuff, from the gloomy townspeople of Termina, or should I say Terminal, to the unforgettable horse snapping of Epona, to the recent theory that Link is actually dead throughout the entirety of the game. Majora's Mask is a wonderland of hopelessness. Looking back on it as an adult, it's uncanny how very real and how very astonishing this game really was, right up to the final boss fight. Number 3, Super Mario 64. Oddly enough, I never actually owned a copy of Super Mario 64, but I do remember playing it for hours at the local mall. Needless to say, I beat the living crap out of that game twice. What makes this one so very memorable though isn't so much its actual gameplay nor the fact that it's highly regarded as one of the greatest Nintendo games of all time. Rather, it would have to be the fact that it was the first official 3D Mario game. The portly plumber had finally made his way into the 3D gaming world, and for a kid like me, that was certainly okay in my book. Though it may not have been as important to me as, say, Crash Bandicoot, it was a fun game nonetheless. Of course, it did have a pretty groovy soundtrack, and those were the days long before Mario games became vastly overrated. Pardon me if I'm just a tad bit biased. Number 2, Donkey Kong 64. Having never been a huge fan of Donkey Kong until my more recent years, there really isn't much I can say about this title other than these 3 main points. Number 1, it had anthropomorphic monkeys wearing clothes, which is pretty freaking cool in its own right. Number 2, there's nothing quite like being serenaded by a nerdy guy with a DK rap heard at the opening cutscene of the game. And number 3, like Goldeneye and Perfect Dark, DK64 was also developed by Rare, therefore it must be good. Number 1, The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time. Bet you weren't expecting this one now, were you? Okay. So maybe it's just a tad bit overdone at this point. But honestly, who can forget Wily slashing at Kuko's in Kakariko Village, only to have their friends come along and quickly diminish every single one of Link's hard-earned hearts? Or the untimely death of the mustachioed great Deco Tree. Whether you were busy sneaking past the castle guards or playing tennis with the evil Ganondorf, every single element from the game's original soundtrack to the graphics to its gameplay were all so very unprecedented. Nearly every game blog on the internet lists OOT as the #1 game of the generation. And this particular writer isn't willing to reject the opinions of gamers everywhere regarding such a timeless, beloved title from Nintendo. If you haven't played Ocarina of Time at least once during your lifetime, it's likely that you either A, had absolutely no childhood whatsoever, or B, hate awesome things, because let me tell you, it was simply awesome. And although it certainly did have its fair share of glitches and bugs, I do have to say The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time was hands down the greatest title the Nintendo 64 ever saw. Now, do you agree with this list? Probably not. But just in case you don't, feel free to let me know in the comments, and I'll see you next time on Trip on this channel. Hope you guys have a good one, man. Be safe. Like, comment, and subscribe.